Hey there, Rusty Nelson here, talking watercolor. I think this is episode 28, and it's been a good week. Had a lot of work to get done last week with the bigger watercolor tutorial, and it took longer to do and it took longer to edit, so it was running a little late. It didn't post until Saturday morning, which was my original posting time, but yeah, it was an interesting thing to get practiced and warmed up on and doing a cityscape. And it depends on the cityscape and the type of architecture, but I do tend to fuss a lot with the architecture pieces that they're harder for me to loosen up on and get more suggestive and get more impressionistic about. So they're definitely on my list, my bucket list of things to really get better at. But I was very happy with that last one on Saturday because it did have a figure in it, and I chose that subject matter because it had that figure in it. And it's one of those where adding that figure in, it's a real, it was so small in that scene, but it adds so much into the scene, and it humanizes and puts that location into a story with that person in it walking down that dark alley, that street. And I was real happy with it because it turned out well. I managed to do that lower body, the legs, that stroke, with enough crunchiness in there that it read perfectly as a walking leg. And I think I mentioned in that video as I was doing it that it's essentially, and I've seen this, I learned this on YouTube years ago. When painting figures in scenes, you're essentially painting kind of like a carrot, that carrot shape to get the human body. You have that upper torso, and then it tapers down to the legs because normally the figure would be walking in some way. And depending upon the point of view where you're at, that figure is going to probably be one leg dominant on there. So it's a carrot shape, and you don't get wrapped up with fussy details like feet and stuff like that. So it's a fun thing, and I practiced those little characters quite a bit. And I'm going to do a tutorial on painting figures here very soon, and just that act of grouping those shapes together and how they automatically start registering in the viewer's mind as a group of people. So it's a lot of fun, and especially when you're doing a lot of wet on wet color interactions in the figures too. It's pretty cool, and it's a lot of fun, and it's something to practice. Definitely something to practice, just like the figure drawing tutorials where you need to just warm up and practice. You should also warm up with these little characters before you dive into the character in your scene. And like I said in the video, it was one of the last things I was doing. So, and it was a key critical thing to inject into the piece. So I don't normally recommend waiting for doing a critical piece of the scene to the very end, because you may have just wasted all that time in your watercolor before you tackle the thing that's hard or could be giving you the biggest problems. So try to get those things out of the way first and early, so that if you do mess up, you can start over and you don't feel as bad about starting over. So, but anyway, that was my last watercolor post. So I'm glad everybody was enjoying it, and I've gotten some good comments on it. Oh, by the way, welcome new viewers. I've had an influx of new viewers and to the channel, and if you haven't had a chance yet, definitely go back through some of my earlier posts if you can suffer through them. I started this in January, and so we're closing in. I'm going to be having a channel birthday before too long, but some of my earlier posts, and my earliest posts, were really starting out from ground zero by simply learning how to make a mark, how to create form with basic shapes, both drawing and even, I think some of my first videos were all about drawing. There was no watercolor until maybe my 5th or 6th week into it. And we've been working with basic shapes, basic subject matter, 2-point perspective, 3-point perspective, 1-point perspective. So all of those things are back in my library of earlier videos. I'm probably going to be rehashing some of those again. It's about time to kind of restart my semester, and it's always a good thing to kind of go back and refresh yourself with what you've been doing, what you've been learning, and go back to the basics and see if you forgot something. Might get you started on practicing certain things again. And I've also moved into various scenes. I've done landscapes, several landscapes. We've done some rocks. We've done some cliff faces, architecture, people. We've done, I think I've only done one female watercolor from a Loomis sketch. So I'm going to add another woman or person into a watercolor tutorial coming up as well. Got Halloween to take care of coming up, so I've got a good little drawing. I think this coming drawing tutorial, instead of a full, well, I'll probably still do a warm-up session. It might be just a little faster, or maybe I speed through it. Maybe Demo Rusty will give way to the voiceover Rusty during the warm-ups, so we can zip through the warm-ups a little quicker, even though they're only a minute long or 2 minutes long. You know, if you do 8 or 9 of them, that's 10, 15, 20 minutes that you've just dedicated to warming up. And I don't want to diminish them, because they are very important. You've got to do those quick little sketches, those little warm-up figures or heads or whatever you're practicing. Do the warm-ups first before you dedicate yourself to the longer one. And I think this week I'll maybe try to do like an hour-long charcoal drawing of a head, of a face, of a portrait this time. And I think that will be one of the kind of the progression of things to do. You know, do the warm-ups and the 15 and 20-minute videos. Although my last drawing tutorial that posted this morning, Monday, it was actually more of like a 26, almost a half-hour long warm-up sketch. So, but I do those as well in my normal class periods. So we might move from a minute to 2-minute poses up to 5-minute, do a few of those, and then we move to 15-minute. Move to a 30. I think we typically will do a couple of 30-minute poses, and then we'll move into the long, hour-long pose. So it's definitely a system, a process, and also talking about systems. I've had a couple of good comments about, some opinions that Loomis may be a little too process-oriented, maybe too mechanical. It's maybe not as artistic as other people have learned how to draw the figure, with doing just those nice contour gestures and things like that. And that's a process. That's a system as well. It was never. I think it takes longer to develop the hand at doing those pure gesture drawings, following contour lines and things like that through the figure, to really get you. And I will admit, it gets your hand and eye synced up really well when you're doing that, and because that's essentially the method and the system. I don't even want to call it a system. That's just how you were expected to learn how to draw the figure when I went through college. So I didn't discover Loomis till well after college, and understand that somebody had broken it down into a lot of systems and processes and structures that you can use to get the poses correct, get the attitudes correct, the body language and everything, and get your proportions a little more under control using this system. So I definitely had a good comment or two about that. Oh, what else have we been doing? Oh, I had a couple questions concerning, I definitely worked on good paper in my last watercolor tutorial. That was some Arches paper. And I used my good palette, which then leads typically to what type of a palette it is. It's a big, heavy porcelain palette I either got off of Amazon or from Dick Blick. And it was pricey, so it was a nice little investment on my part. It might have been like $30 if I remember right, 25, $30. And the kinds of colors I like to use are typically Winsor Newton or the M-gram tube paints that I typically squirt into the pan. And just remember, or into the palette, just remember as well, you don't have to have a really huge, broad range of colors in your palette if you're working on a budget and trying to keep it affordable. Even if you're trying to get some better colors and things like that, and you can do them slowly and build up over time. But if you just think of your color palette and have a good primary red, a cyan, or a good strong blue and yellow, and a black and a white, and that's really all you're going to need. And you should it would definitely develop your color mixing prowess if you stick with only those four to five colors that you could do. But I typically will, if I'm having a limited palette, I'll work with a very small number of colors and accentuate with some earth tones like your yellow ochres or your burnt sienna, burnt umber. I do like the sepia color. It's a really nice, deep, rich brown, which when you mix with your ultramarine blue or your phthalo blue, it creates a really rich, dark, blackish color. It's not a solid black. Plus, if you introduce some water into it, you can get some color variation with it when you start feathering things. So it's not just gray, not a neutral gray. So it's something to consider when you're working and getting better supplies. But again, don't feel like you have to have that high dollar stuff as you're just getting started. I did have somebody ask what kind of a supply list, and I've really been posting everything I've been using. Almost got that supply list in all of my watercolor tutorials of the types of brushes I'm using, the paints. Winsor Newton or the M-gram are both really good paints. I like them a lot. And if you do really want to stay on the student side of it, and I've said this in previous videos, either the tutorials, maybe even in Talking Watercolor, that amazingly, and trust me, I know it's not a top-notch paint, but amazingly, those Prang sets of 18, I think it's an 18 set, 9 on each thing. It's primary, secondary, and tertiary colors in that little Prang pan set. Those are really good student grade colors. You can really take them down and mix them up, and they hold their colors pretty well as you desaturate them. They don't get terribly grainy when you get that really, really loose, light mixture with the paints. So, yeah, I mean, I was always stunned when I tried it and worked with it, and I've painted some pretty nice things. And now they may not be as light fast as the higher dollar pigments, and light fast meaning they will fade maybe over time under lights, or even especially in direct sunlight, they'll fade over time. So you want to keep them out of that kind of an environment. But if you're learning and you're just wanting to practice and get good, use some of the less expensive papers and the cheaper pigments until you get a handle on the techniques and the methods that you're going to be doing. And definitely for you new viewers, go back into my library and see kind of the progression of projects we've done from simple shapes and just trying to control modeling. That was a good question too. Somebody asked me what I meant by modeling in one of my drawing demos, and modeling just means adding a three-dimensional form to a shape. So through shading. So we go through the modeling, we move into basic still life shapes, organic shapes, you got mechanical shapes, inorganic. So there's all sorts of things that you really kind of have to build your skills and work through. And that's really, if you start at the very beginning of my channel, you're going to see that kind of a progression. And I've treated it pretty much just like my in-person watercolor class or my drawing class. It's start with the fundamentals, get some of those basic. If you're playing basketball, you got to learn how to dribble. You got to know how to handle the ball. So you're really focusing in on those fundamentals when you're first getting started, and then you'll pretty soon be able to run those plays of complex watercolor scenes, still lifes, or landscapes, architecture, people, any of those things. It's because you've built a good, strong, solid foundation and an understanding and techniques that you can rely on when you're getting going. So, hey, you know what? I've been talking for 15 minutes and I've had a good talk here, I think. I hope I've given you some information that is valuable. Get back into my earlier chapters. Get over to my website. I'll put the link into my video description for some Loomis PDFs to download, and there's a watercolor PDF download from Joseph Zabukvik and his book about watercolor, which is an excellent book, and it goes into his methods as to watercolor, which I have read the book and really do appreciate the skills and the knowledge that he brings into that. And let me know if you got any value out of this. Drop me some more comments and leave me a like and a subscribe, and I really appreciate it. And thank you for watching, and I'll see you next week in Talking Watercolor.